Okay, guys, so for today, what we're going to be doing is we are going to be using figurative language. So exciting. So, to begin, we are going to review the two types of figurative language that we see most often and talk the most often about, which is metaphors and similes. So, metaphors, a comparison of two dissimilar things meant to point out what they have in common. Simile is similar to this, except that this one points out what they have in common by using words like or as. Why do we use metaphors and similes? We use them to make writing more interesting. We use it to describe or to create descriptions that are more relatable to audiences. We use it for writing to make it more sophisticated and because it allows us to use our imaginations. Here's our example of metaphor versus simile. The metaphor, her hair was an untamable wildfire. The simile, her hair erupted like a volcano, just as red and just as unruly. Tips for writing metaphors. When we write metaphors, we want to compare things that people might already be familiar with. We want to use them to make mundane or boring details seem interesting. We want to use them to emphasize important elements. We want to use them to give lots of description in a little amount of time, and because it helps shape your individual writing. These are examples of bad metaphors and similes. If we look over at the metaphor, it reads, the curls were waves of crimson barley constrained with the confines of her ponytail. With the velocity of the ocean, no man made product would keep them down. That is so long. That is a very long metaphor, and it gets kind of mudded up with a bunch of unnecessary details. The simile, her hair sat on her head like a cap of Amanita muscaria, or however you say that. This is a bad simile because no one knows what that is. You want to be able to compare things to, you want to be able to compare examples to things that people already are familiar with. Now, 5 other figurative language terms that we need to know and understand. Alliteration, which is using the same repeating sound with the purpose of drawing attention to something. When we use alliterations, it does not need to be every single word, and it should emphasize something important. Our example, her shoes smack across the cement as she storms away. Allusion is when we make a comparison between what you've written and what has already been written. The example would be Rachel knew that tonight at prom with her longtime crush was her Cinderella moment. This works because most of us are already familiar with the Cinderella story. Hyperbole is an extreme exaggeration well beyond the possible truth meant to emphasize something's significance or importance. Writers use this to help express how important something is to a character. It helps to build a narrator's voice and it shows the character's priorities. The example, Cecilia screamed, if you don't let me go to Tony's party, I'll literally die. No, honey, her mom said. You literally won't. Onomatopoeia is the spelling out of sound inaudible objects make, such as crash, boing, zoom. We use this to help build suspense during climactic moments. It helps to break up chunky prose or poems, and it describes the sound you want your reader to hear clearly. Personification is giving human traits to non human objects like animals, or furniture, or nature, or space. We use personification to humanize non human objects. It gives personality to these non human objects, and it makes things more relatable. The example is the police car dodged in and out of traffic in search of the suspect. Okay, what I need from you now is I need you to pull up Rap 4.1. We are going to be going through it together. So, in Rap 4.1, we are going to be reading The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. It says, once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. "Only this, and nothing more." Ah, distinctly, I remember it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly, I wished the morrow. Vainly, I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels named Lenore, nameless here forevermore. And the silken set uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor, entreating entrance at my chamber door, some late visitor, entreating entrance at my chamber door. This is it, and nothing more." Presently, my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," said I, "or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore, but the fact is, I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping, tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you." Here I opened wide the door, darkness there, and nothing more. So number one asks, what is the effect of the repetition of the phrase, only this slash this it is, and nothing more? Number two asks, how many syllables does line one have? Line one will go from once to weary. That is line one. Number three says, the title of the poem is The Raven. What could the raven most likely represent? Number four says, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. This is an example of what type of figurative language? Now, going on to number five, how is the speaker's emotional state conveyed by Poe's use of sound, language, and structure? What do we think the speaker of our poem is feeling? You're going to use SRE format to answer, and you're going to use evidence from the poem.